저희 세션에 오신 것을 환영합니다. 저는 서울대학교 심리학과의 최인철 교수입니다. Hi, my name is Incheol Choi, professor of psychology at Seoul National University. I'm very honored to be a moderator of this session. We have fantastic lineup today. We have two great minds in happiness research, Professor Jan-Emmanuel Deneve from Oxford University and Professor Sonia Lyubomirsky at UC Riverside. We also have two discussants, Mr. Bongjin Kim, CEO of 우아한 형제들, and Mr. Seung-gun Lee, CEO of Viva Republica. Our session has total 90 minutes, and two professors will speak for 20 minutes each, and after that, two CEOs will make comments about the talks, and after that, I'm going to open up the discussion and we'll take questions and comments from the audience. Okay, so without further ado, let's begin with Professor Deneve. Professor Deneve is a professor of business at Oxford University. He's an economist, and his work is about economics and well-being. So please welcome Professor Deneve.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for those kind words of introduction. And it's such a privilege and a pleasure to be here with you today for the Global HR Forum. In the space of the next 20 minutes or so, I would like to lay an empirical foundation for many of the questions I think that will be addressed by this distinguished panel this afternoon. And in doing so, I would like to structure the research insights that have come through our work by way of 5, I think, critical questions in the space of employee well-being that I'm sure all of you have probably thought about at some point. And I would like to start off with perhaps the most basic of all, and in a way remind ourselves of just how important work is for well-being in the first place, something that is often forgotten or overlooked. And then I want to move on to the question of, once on the job, are we happy with our work? Are we happy in the job? Are we engaged with it? And you'll see that the results there are rather staggering as well. And then, if there's room for improvement, is there also a business case for investing in employee well-being? Most of you will agree that employee well-being is very important, but sometimes there's skeptics in the room, and they will need to be convinced with hard numbers for why employee well-being actually matters for productivity and firm performance. So I want to ask the question and give you what I think is the best evidence to date on it around does employee well-being actually drive performance? And if it does, how do we prioritize what interventions to actually look for in the workspace to then drive employee well-being forward? So what is it that drives employee well-being most? And are there examples and case studies of interventions that work well? And so in the space of the next few minutes, I want to run you through these basic questions that I think are empirical questions, that if you allow sufficient data onto these items, leveraging good science, then you will get robust answers to these empirical questions. So without further ado, and in the interest of time, I will move on rather quickly to look at that first basic question. So to remind ourselves just how important is work for well-being. What you're seeing behind me is the result of a global survey, thanks to the Gallup World Poll, where we ask people around the world, representative samples from most countries around the world, just how satisfied are you with your life? The average response to that question is about 5 out of 10 globally. Now, if you split this sample up in people with a job and people without a job, you'll suddenly find a gap of about 20% opening up for both men or women alike. That's a huge difference between having a job or not having a job in terms of well-being. Now, the difference does not just derive from a difference in pay or income. It also derives from the fact that your job, your employment, gives you a sense of identity, gives you social connections, and gives you a routine and a structure throughout the day. And these things matter very much indeed, as you can tell from these data. If we look at the difference in the experience of negative emotions between people in employment versus people without employment, you'll see that the difference is even starker. So people without employment reporting 50% more emotions such as worry, anxiety, and stress. So this gives us a picture of the importance of work overall and gives you, as HR managers and professionals, a very important mission in life, I would argue, which is to do the very best for attracting people into work, keeping them into work, and providing a quality job. Now, human beings are a special species and are rather complex at that one, because even though work is so important for us, once we're on the job, we're not particularly happy either. What you're seeing here is that same global data set where we've split up the world's population by region into the extent to which people are actively engaged in their work. And what you're seeing is rather disturbing. Less than 20% across different regions around the world actually describe themselves as actively engaged in their jobs. So that's rather problematic and not good news. The flip side of this, of course, is that there is much room for improvement. And so the fact that we're having this panel here with you today obviously means that we can work on trying to improve employee satisfaction and engagement moving forward, right? And again, it gives a very important mission to you to try and work on this particular task of trying to drive employee engagement forward, because there is much room for improvement in most organizations. Now, is there a business case for doing this? Can you convince the CEO or presidents or shareholders of companies to invest in employee well-being above and beyond the ethical or normative aspect of having to do so? And here, I'm very pleased to say that I'll be talking to you about our latest research that links employee well-being to productivity and ultimately firm performance. You may have seen in the news in the last 2 weeks, we've just released a new paper in collaboration with British Telecom, one of the largest UK employers, that got quite a bit of attention in the media over the last 2 weeks since we released it, where we've pulsed and surveyed employee well-being of all of their call center employees over the space of 6 months, and we asked them a question of how happy you are this week, every week throughout that period of 6 months. We did this by way of emailing them around 4 p.m. on Thursday afternoons each week, this very basic question for which the technology was provided by our other partner in this research, a fantastic HR company and technology solution called Butterfly AI. Now, the responses to this question every week came back from these thousands of call center employees, leading to a very large data set of being able to track employees from 1 week to another about how they felt as they went through the weeks through the weeks at work. And then what we did is to match this rather rich employee well-being data set that we've generated with this very detailed level of performance that British Telecom has about each one of the call center employees. And so whether you're looking for links to customer satisfaction, productivity is measured through sales or seconds on each call, or productivity is measured through sick days or absence, all these kind of metrics we have data for, and we were able to match that back to see the extent to which employee well-being from 1 week to another is predictive of these particular performance metrics that I'm sure all of you in your organizations will be looking at as well. And the results were really rather staggering. And so I'll start with a very basic result, which is if you look across the call centers, which are spread around the UK, the first big result, purely correlational, but very interesting nonetheless, is to look at the average weekly employee happiness, which runs on a scale from 1 to 5. And you look at the average weekly employee happiness by call center, and then you link that with the customer satisfaction coming back for those same weeks in the same periods for each one of these call centers. So this obviously groups a large number of employees together each time. You find already rather stark differences and a strong positive correlation between the employee happiness each week at a call center and the customer satisfaction coming back from the interaction with clients. This is grouping individuals together in call centers, but the really exciting bit about this particular line of research is that we have employee well-being regularly measured at the individual level over time. So what I'm showing you next is the actual relationship between changes in well-being within an individual over time and how that relates to yet another performance metric, in this case sales, weekly sales. What you're seeing here is when a person moves from being unhappy one week to being very happy the other week, we detect a change in weekly sales of plus 13%. I don't think the business case could be made any stronger than this for senior leaders to invest in well-being. Now, for those of you who are interested in this kind of research, there's some interesting sub-findings of this work. You see the gradient between employee well-being and sales is really positive. But if we look and delve into the kinds of sales that were even more impactful or effective, for which happiness is even more impactful, we find that there's a gradient in the complexity of sales. So for simple sales, like just order taking, happiness doesn't have much of a positive impact. But if you look at more complex sales that deal with complex products, that require emotional labor and social skills, dealing with customers, for example, dealing with unhappy customers and trying to retain them or upsell them to a different package, that's where we find that happiness has the strongest coefficient, the strongest impact. So as you look and delve into the data in a more detailed fashion, you'll find that it reveals more and more interesting insights about the power of happiness in terms of driving productivity. One other aspect about this research is that the effect of employee happiness and productivity does not run through people working more. It's not like they spend more hours in the call center or spend less time in breaks. The effect runs purely through becoming more efficient while on the job. So we find that people happier do more calls per hour and are more efficient in translating these calls into sales while maintaining customer satisfaction. In other words, doing more calls, more sales without a reduction in customer satisfaction. So this is quite exciting, I would argue, and probably the best robust field evidence out there today. Now, this is very much at the individual level, the relationship between employee well-being and productivity, which I hope gives you a wonderful business case to bring back to your companies and your senior management teams. But if you look at it at a broader scale, the actual performance of organizations and firms as a whole, we've also done some research on that. So what you're seeing next is a collaboration again with the Gallup organization, where we were able to leverage 1.8 million employee engagement surveys. And what these show you across many hundreds of firms, across many industries, across many countries, is something, again, very striking. These are just correlations, but they tell you a very powerful story indeed. Companies, whether in finance, retail, services, or manufacturing, if they do well on employee engagement and happiness metrics, that correlates very strongly with how they do in terms of customer loyalty. It correlates very strongly with how they do in terms of employee productivity. It correlates very strongly with profitability for the organization, and it correlates very strongly with decreased staff turnover, which I think is an overlooked issue in HR and productivity studies, because having your people stay for 8 or 9 years rather than, say, 6 or 7 is a massive impact on people's bottom line and a good for the company overall. Now, so that gives you, I think, this evidence, together with the evidence that I'm sure will follow on this panel, will give you a very strong business case, I think, for why employee well-being matters and it's worthwhile investing in. So that then raises the question, okay, so now that we're decided, I hope, and all of you convinced, to invest in employee well-being, then the question becomes, well, what should we focus our attention on? Because there's much that you can do in terms of driving employee well-being. And so here, too, we look for the biggest data set possible that has aspects of jobs, all kinds of job characteristics. And so behind me are 12 items in terms of job characteristics that we have data for in relation to employee well-being and job satisfaction. If we had more time, I would ask you to stand still for a moment and reflect upon which one of these 12 items is perhaps most important to you in your job or most important to people in your organization. But in the interest of time, we'll move on, and I'll give you the results of what one could consider a bit of a horse race between these 12 dimensions of jobs in the workplace, and to see the relative importance of these items in relation to driving employee engagement in an international data set. And the result is as follows. These are these 12 items ranked from having lots of negative impact on employee of job satisfaction to having very much positive impact. What you're seeing is that if we look at, for example, pay, how much you're being paid on the job, it is, of course, an important aspect of job satisfaction. But it only comes in position 3, the third place, if you will, in this horse race. So money matters, especially at the bottom of the pay scale, but by no means is it the most important driver of employee well-being. In this international data set, we find that 2 other aspects of the job work their magic much more than pay. And those 2 are finding the job intrinsically interesting in the first place, so having a sense of purpose and meaning and identifying with the job beyond just the work hours. But most importantly, really, I think we find that the quality of the social relations, the interpersonal relations on the job, the social capital within your organizations, is what really makes people tick and makes them appreciate the job very much indeed. Within and amongst these relationships that one has on the job, if you zoom in, the one that has the biggest weight attached to it, the one that is the most important one of all, is not just colleagues in general, but is a relationship with your line manager. And I'm sure it is often said, and a bit of a cliche to this audience, but it's often said that people don't leave their jobs, they leave their manager. They leave their boss. And that's exactly what we pick up in the data. What people appreciate most or are most concerned about in terms of job satisfaction is when the relationship with their line manager is not good. And that's when they leave their jobs. Now, this then automatically, of course, points in a number of directions in terms of potential interventions. And so we can speak about this at length, and I'm sure in the discussion we will probably delve into some of these aspects and examples of potential interventions. But what you're seeing here behind me is a bit of a wish list or a long menu deriving from this empirical analysis just before of the types of interventions that I think can do much good in terms of driving well-being. As I've noted, the analysis suggests that the importance of social capital and relationship with the line manager in particular. So this, to me, suggests as a priority in organizations to focus strongly on improving managerial skills and empathy. And there are a number of companies and a number of programs that have been working on this and doing a fantastic job. So there's some evidence that it is possible and that it works very well. There's also, again, to drive a culture, a positive social culture in your organization, there's this notion of emphasizing positive contributions, something that Sonja Lyubomirsky has done a lot of fantastic work on that I'm sure she will talk about this afternoon as well. There's also notions of peer recognition type schemes. So for example, at the company LinkedIn, globally, there's a program called Bravo within the company that incentivizes people to reward and recognize efforts of people that have gone beyond the call of duty within the firm to help each other. So between employees, you can essentially award points and incentivize. There's a pot of money made available for this to help employees reward extraordinary behavior that would otherwise not go noticed, financially at least. So emphasizing positive contributions. And then there's a number of workplaces that have really started introducing participatory elements in the workplace. And then finally, something, again, to try and drive and structure the workplace in such a way that it drives a positive social culture that is conducive to good social capital and relations on the job. And that has something to do with pay. And as an economist, we're always interested in incentives and money and pay, especially as a driver of employee well-being. But we tend to see pay as too simple a construct. We tend to think of pay as your monthly wage, for example. But it's not always how much you're being paid, but often about how you are being paid that can also influence the way that people perceive this and structure social interactions. So for example, if a part of your compensation package consists of profit sharing, group bonuses rather than individual bonuses, and share purchase plans, it's a way of bringing people together, especially in the case of group bonuses, and also a way of getting people engaged with the company if there's aspects of profit sharing involved. So that allows for more participatory and positive culture type organizations. And then finally, work-life balance and other aspects of the job are also incredibly important. So when we think about work-life balance, especially moving into the 21st century, where people can work from a distance and dial in if need be, you find the possibilities for flexi time, autonomy, and potentially also a 4-day work week where people can rearrange their work and try and be more productive 4 days a week while delivering the output of 5 days a week, as has been shown to work out very well in a New Zealand company called Perpetual Guardian. And most recently, and currently very much in the news, you may have just seen it, Microsoft Japan has also trialed a 4-day work week where they allow people to restructure their week so they can potentially get a day off even though they're being paid for 5 days and deliver on the work for 5 days, but just by reorganizing themselves, their work as units and teams. So these are very exciting and important developments, I think, as we move into the 21st century and kind of the new future of work type labor force and way of working. And then finally, of course, there are the less structural but perhaps more soft interventions that are also obviously helpful, such as meditation, health checks, and sports classes, which I'm sure most of your organizations already perform. Anyway, I will leave it at this. I thank you very much for your time and your attention, and I look forward to answering, hopefully, the many questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Neve. It was intellectually very stimulating and interesting talk based on lots of data. Thank you. Our next speaker is Professor Sonia Lyubomirsky. As a fellow psychologist, I think she's crazy. She has written tons of journal articles and book chapters and best-selling books, including The How of Happiness and The Myth of Happiness. So please welcome Professor Sonia Lyubomirsky.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna try to give this talk sitting down. See how that works. Thank you for inviting me to this fantastic conference, this HR Forum. It's my 4th time in Seoul. It's a beautiful city. I'm really happy to be here. So I'm going to be talking today about my work on happiness. I just celebrated my 30th anniversary of doing research on happiness. This is my office, but let me see if this is going to work. Maybe I should try that one, huh? All right. Okay, and a lot of the research I'll be talking about is in my book, The How of Happiness, and I have the Korean translation up there as well. And here are my fantastic collaborators. I also work with Inter Choi, our moderator as well. We have a number of studies together. So I want to start actually by taking a long step back. And by the way, I'm going to be using the word happiness, just that's the word that most people use. I'm going to take a long step back to World War II. So during the Second World War, aviation experts deployed a lot of energy and resources into studying military planes that went down. And one day somebody asked, why don't we study the planes that stay up in the air? And I think that's an apt metaphor for the work that my colleagues and I do in the field of well-being science. We study why happy people are happy, why successful people are successful, why healthy people are healthy. And I believe that most people in the world want to be happy, and actually researchers study these questions. They go to all different countries and they ask people, what are their top goals in life? What are your most important goals? I'm going to show you some data from a few countries. So first, let's look at the United States. So this is a question. The question is, how important is happiness to you on a 7-point scale? And Americans rate happiness as really important, about a 6.6 on a 7-point scale. But here's some data from some countries like Greece, Germany, of course, South Korea, China, and Argentina. And you see that people in other countries, too, rate, even though they're very different cultures. South Korea is actually almost identical to the US in how important happiness is. I think the pursuit of happiness is a a universal goal or almost a universal goal. And it's a worthwhile goal as well. So it turns out that happy people enjoy a lot of advantages, enjoy a lot of benefits. So happiness is not just about pleasure. It's not just about feeling good. When you're happy, it's not just good for you. It's good for your family. It's good for your colleagues. It's good for your society and your community. A number of years ago, a couple of my colleagues and I did what's called a meta-analysis, which is like an analysis of many analyses. We looked at 225 studies of happiness, and we found that happy people, as Jan has mentioned, are more productive at work, they're more creative, they make more money and have better jobs. Now, of course, the causal direction goes both ways, right? So making money, having a good, flexible job makes you happy, but if you're happier, if you experience more positive emotions, you also are more likely to get a better job and to make more money and to be more productive, as we've just saw in the last talk. Happier people also make better leaders and negotiators, and they have better relationships. Happier people are more likely to get married, less likely to get divorced. They have more friends. A famous study, for example, showed that women who look happy in their yearbook photos in college, they show genuine happy smiles, are more likely to get married by age 27 and have more fulfilling marriages at age 52. So your smile at age 21 predicts whether you have a good marriage 30 years later. Happier people also are healthier. They have stronger immune systems. They live longer, and they're more helpful. They're more philanthropic. They give more money to charity, and they're also more resilient, sort of are better able to bounce back from adversity. So I don't think that we need to make a choice between happiness and success, because if you choose happiness, success will follow, is what the research suggests. I just want to take a few moments to define happiness. I define happiness like a lot of psychologists do, which is that happiness has two components. It has an emotional component, and it has what's called a kind of a judgmental component. And I think of these components as being happy in your life and being happy with your life. So being happy in your life is experiencing positive emotions like tranquility, joy, enthusiasm, serenity, pride, affection, experiencing positive emotions on a regular basis. Of course, negative emotions are also important to experience when they're not chronic and when they're appropriate to the situation. But then also having a sense that your life is good, that you're satisfied with how you're progressing towards your life goal. So those are the two components of happiness that are most important. So actually, as I was listening to Jan's talk, I decided to revise my talk about 20% and skip over a few things, because he already went over sort of some research showing that happy people are more productive at work. But I'm going to tell you about a quick study that talks about happiness and creativity. And so this is one of my favorite studies, kind of an old classic study. There was actually an experiment. So sometimes researchers study the question of happiness and its outcomes by doing experiments. And so these researchers found a group of doctors. These were medical doctors, physicians, and they made them happy temporarily. Now, how do you make someone happy for a few minutes or for half an hour? There's lots of ways to do that. One way is you give them a gift. And a really good way is you give them a gift of chocolate and candy. A lot of people are happy, at least for a few minutes, when they're given a gift of candy. So these doctors their happy mood was induced by getting a gift of chocolate and candy. And then there was also a control group that was a neutral, kind of did not get a gift, neutral mood. And then they were given a test of creativity. Now, there are different ways of testing creativity in the laboratory, and one way is kind of a popular test called the Remote Associates Test. Now, this is hard to do if English is not your first language. Actually, I'm not a native English speaker. I think maybe no one here is a native, on stage anyway, is a native English speaker, so it's hard for me to do too. So you get a list of 3 words, and here's an example: crab, sauce, and pine, and you have to find a 4th word that relates to these 3 words. Okay? And you get a lot of these items. So anyone know what the answer is to this one? It's apple. So crab apple, applesauce, and pineapple. You see that? So once you see it, it seems easy if you know English. But if you can do this really fast, and there's lots and lots of items like this, then the idea is that you show more creative and flexible thinking. So this study showed the doctors who were given a gift of candy did better on this test. So isn't that amazing? Just a transient, short-term positive mood can lead people to do better on this kind of task and this kind of test. So, and then I think we should appreciate the importance of short-term positive emotions. Even bursts of positive emotion throughout your workday can lead you to be more creative and more productive. Studies like this show. So to summarize so far, happy workers have been found to be physically healthier, to have stronger immune systems. That means they're less likely to get colds and stay away from work. That means they're going to be more likely to show up to work with more energy and more focus and more vigor. Happier workers are going to accomplish more. As Jan showed, they're going to offer more creative ideas. And also, they're going to be more likely to help their colleagues. Research shows that happier people make better organizational citizens. And it's very important, of course, to help each other in the workplace. So the question that I have been exploring for the last about 20 years is, can you become happier, right? So we know happier people, they feel good, right? All these good things come to them. They're more successful in lots of domains in life. But can you actually become happier? That's kind of the million-dollar question. And how can you do it? So my argument is that, yes, you can become happier. Now, in the past, there's been a lot of pessimism about whether it's even possible to be happier. Some people think that happiness is genetic, right? And some of us are just born happier than others, and you can't do anything about it. It is true that happiness is influenced by our genes, but it doesn't mean that we can't change it. Also, research shows that our life circumstances don't affect our happiness as much as we think they do. Of course, whether we're rich or poor or healthy or sick is going to affect our happiness. But once we're comfortable, once we're kind of here, you know, having more money, having more things is not going to make us as happy as sort of we think it will. But despite that, research shows that a lot of happiness is under our control. It's under our power to change by the ways that we think every day and the ways that we behave every day. So we can become happier. And this is what a lot of researchers are trying to sort of discover these days, as how can we do it? What can we do to become happier? So a lot of this is in my book, The How of Happiness. I talk about different kinds of strategies or activities that people can engage in on a regular basis that can increase their happiness. Now, look at this list. Do any of these strategies surprise you? They're not really surprising, right? Being grateful makes people happier, being optimistic, savoring the moment, practicing your religion if you have one, investing in relationships. These are all strategies that have been shown to be associated with happiness and to make people happier. And so what I do in my research is we do what we call happiness interventions or positive interventions, which are basically experiments where we instruct people to practice a particular strategy, something that has a positive outcome. So positive interventions are kind of like clinical trials. They're randomized controlled experiments where we randomly assign some people to practice, for example, count your blessings on a regular basis, or do acts of kindness for others, or savor positive things in your life for the next month. And then we also have certain control groups. And we also, like clinical trial, if you're a medical scientist and you're studying a new drug, and you do a clinical trial, you might ask questions like, what is the optimal dosage of the drug? And should certain people not take this drug? And should this drug not be combined with other drugs? Well, we ask the same kinds of questions about something like gratitude. Is there an optimal dosage of gratitude? Can you be too grateful? Should some people not practice gratitude, right? Maybe it doesn't work for everyone. Those are the kinds of questions that I ask as well. And so we've done lots and lots of happiness interventions. These are some examples up here. Over the course of several weeks or a couple of months, we asked people to count their blessings, to act. We just did a study where we asked people to act more extroverted for a week and then to act more introverted for a week, and vice versa, and to see whether happiness changed. And so I'm going to just give you a flavor of some of this empirical evidence, but just showing you a couple of studies really quickly. But there are a lot more. If you're interested, I have lots of papers I can send you. You can email me. So the focus of my research is the question, how and why do happiness enhancing strategies work? Sort of how does the pursuit of happiness work? Sort of what are the key factors that you need to take sort of to keep in mind for the pursuit of happiness to be successful? So here's an example. This is the very, very first intervention that my lab ever did in 1999, 20 years ago. We asked people to count their blessings for 6 weeks. So every week, we want you to write down 5 things that you're grateful for, okay? But in this study, we were interested in the optimal dosage of counting your blessings. So we had people either count their blessings once a week, every Sunday night, count your blessings, think about what you're grateful for, or we asked people to do it 3 times a week, every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday night. And here's what we found. And so here, changes in gratitude and changes in happiness from before to after the 6-week intervention. And you see here, you look at the red bars, those are the participants who counted their blessings once a week. They're the ones who got happier, and they became more grateful relative to the other groups. If you counted your blessings 3 times a week, nothing happened. It didn't make you more grateful. It didn't make you happier. So here's a study that showed that dosage is important, that on average, maybe if you count your blessings too often, it might become a chore. Maybe it kind of isn't meaningful after a while. Maybe it becomes a burden, or maybe it backfires, right? If you try too hard to be grateful, you might find it difficult to think of things in your life that you're grateful for, and so you might conclude that I don't really have that much fortune in my life. By the way, there's also cultural differences. So Choi and I did a study where we found that, actually we did a study with students at Seoul National University, and we found that students in Seoul who were asked to write gratitude letters did not get happier. But American students did get happier, and I'm happy to talk about that later, but there are cultural differences. So the same strategy doesn't always work for the same person, and actually so here's the importance of dosage. That's a really good transition to my next point, is the importance of fit. So when you try to pursue happiness, improve your happiness, you have to think about, does this strategy fit with my personality, with my goals, with my values, with my culture, with my strengths? And for certain people, gratitude might not work. For certain cultures, it may be very beneficial. For others, it might be less so. So you have to be really careful about fit. Another thing that's important is motivation. So we did a study where we had people who were motivated and invested and interested in becoming happier. Those are the orange bars. And we asked them to either write gratitude letters or to try to be optimistic about the future. And then we compared them with people who weren't as motivated to become happier. And we found that if people who were motivated or invested in happiness, they were more successful at becoming happier. That's not surprising, right? They put more effort into it. They were more likely to take it seriously and to stick with their strategies. Just like if you wanted to become healthier and exercise more, if you're really motivated, you're going to stick with it more. You're going to put more effort into it. So motivation matters, and person activity fit matters. The last factor I want to tell you about is the importance of focusing on other people. Now, I think, just my personal opinion, that a lot of, or maybe most human problems are caused because we focus too much on ourselves, right? We're dwelling, we're ruminating, we're worried, we're anxious, we're depressed. And when anything that you can do to take the focus off of yourself and put the focus onto other people or on other things, maybe it's work, maybe it's some kind of goal that you have, is going to make you happier. So in this study that I'm showing you here, we asked people to do acts of kindness every week for 4 weeks. We said, do 3 acts of kindness for other people every week for 4 weeks. That's the red line. Or we asked people, do 3 acts of kindness a week for yourself. So these are things like, I could get a massage, I could have a nice lunch, I could take a nap, do something nice for yourself. We found that only people who did acts of kindness for others got happier and stayed happier. If you did acts of kindness for yourself, it didn't really do much to change your happiness, only maybe very temporarily. So this shows the importance of being oriented towards other people and how much it affects happiness. So ironically, if you want to make yourself happier, you should try to make other people happier, and that's going to make yourself happier. Okay. We also ask other questions about maybe practicing these strategies, does it have benefits beyond happiness? Does it affect other domains in life? So one question I wanted to just tell you about, one of the last things is, can doing acts of kindness also affect health? So we did a study that is really exciting that was published recently, where we asked people to do acts of kindness for others or acts of kindness for yourself, and we took blood, all right, we collected blood from people from before to after we did this intervention, and we partnered with a genomics researcher at UCLA, and here's what we found. We found that only people who did acts of kindness for others over the course of a month, they showed changes in their RNA gene expression that were associated with a healthier immune profile. So you see that bar that's going down? This is acts of kindness for others, so people who helped others as opposed to those who helped themselves or other control groups, they showed downregulation of pro-inflammatory genes. Downregulation of pro-inflammatory genes. Inflammation is bad, right? You want to have less inflammation, so fewer genes that are pro-inflammation. Okay, so acts of kindness for others actually have potential to change your health as well. And I want to end today with a last study that I think is kind of a nice study to end on, with a talk at a HR forum. And this is a study that I did in a Japanese engineering company, where we asked the employees of this company for 6 weeks, every week, to write down 3 things that went well at work. So it's a very simple intervention, just an 8-minute intervention. Write down 3 things that went well at work. The control group was asked also to do something positive. They were asked to write down 3 tasks that they completed at work, 3 tasks that they completed. And we found that people who wrote down 3 things that went well at work at the end of the week, so let's say every Friday, they got happier, they felt more connected with people, with their colleagues, and they showed up to work with more energy. We actually had them wear accelerometers so we could see how much they were moving. And so they were moving more in the workplace in the morning, only in the morning for some reason. Okay, so maybe we could all try this every Friday. Think about 3 things that went well at work. You will have more focus, more energy, feel more connected to your colleagues, and also be happier. So I want to say one more word. If you are a leader in the workplace, it's very important to be a leader and to model happiness. One reason it's important to be happy as a leader is that happiness is contagious, right? So if you're a leader and you're happy, your happiness is going to be contagious to your employees, to your customers, and to your colleagues. And also, when you model strengths like generosity, like savoring, like optimism, and like kindness, those strengths can spill over and propagate to your employees as well. I always like to end my talks by quoting Aristotle, who 2,000 years ago kind of summarized the main message of the research on well-being, which is that happiness depends upon ourselves. Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Sonia. She arrived last night, and she'll be leaving tonight. She's amazing. She's crazy, yeah. I think her research is psychological in terms of methodology, but your message is quite philosophical. It was quite deep. Thank you. Understanding happiness and understanding what makes people happy is one thing, but making actually people happy in the workplace is another thing. So we'll be hearing from 2 CEOs and how they are doing business in their company and how they are doing things to make their employees happier. So first, Mr. Bongjin Kim, CEO of 우아한 형제들, 여러분 잘 아시는 배달의 민족 CEO입니다. 네, 김봉진 대표님 모시도록 하겠습니다.
네, 반갑습니다. 저는 뭐 따로 강연이 아니고 가볍게 얘기하는 자리로 나왔기 때문에 그냥 가지고 있는 생각들 좀 편하게 얘기 나누도록 하겠습니다. 소냐 교수님께서 말씀해 주셨던 뭐 이야기 중에 자신에게 타인에게 친절을 베풀어라, 그리고 행복은 나 스스로에게 달렸다, 이런 이야기들이 굉장히 인상 깊었는데요. 사실 제가 이 자리에 오게 된 거는 최인철 교수님과의 개인적인 어떤 친분 때문이기도 해요. 최인철 교수님 우리나라에서 가장 이제 행복에 관련돼서 권위 있는 교수님이신데요. 최인철 교수님하고 어떤 일을 하고 있냐면은 최인철 교수님께서는 교사가 행복해야지 아이들이 행복해진다라고 해서 교사 행복 대학을 하고 있어요. 그래서 교사분들에게 행복을 어떻게 하면 할 수 있는지에 대해서 가르치는 일을 하고 있고 주말마다 매주 하고 있어요. 그래서 저도 거기에 후원을 하고 있고 가끔 나가서 그분들과 만나서 이야기도 나누고 있어요. 또 반대로 또 제가 하고 있는 일도 있어요. 거기에 또 최인철 교수님이 도와주시기도 하는데 초등학교 6학년 아이들을 50명을 선정을 해서 그 아이들이 고등학교 졸업할 때까지 생활비와 여러 가지 가정 형편이 어려운 아이들을 지정을 해서 졸업할 때까지 계속 지원해주는 후원하는 일을 하고 있어요. 최 교수님과 같이 아이디어를 모았었는데요. 뭐 후원이라던가 기금을 마련하면은 아이들이 공부를 잘해 가정 형편은 안 좋지만 공부를 잘해야지 해준다. 어떤 특별한 어떤 재능을 가지고 있어야지만 후원한다 이런 건데 저희는 그냥 한번 선정이 되면은 그냥 고등학교를 졸업할 때까지 그냥 계속한다. 그래서 대한민국에서는 아마 최초로 만들어진 기금일 것 같아요. 그래서 제가 사실은 기업을 하면서 굉장히 운이 좋아요. 여러분들 잘 아시겠지만 배달의 민족이 사업도 잘 되고 있는 거죠. 그래서 돈도 많이 벌고 있습니다. 여러분 재수없게 생각하실 수도 있겠지만 그래서 그 운을 좀 세상에 좀 나누는 일이 또 필요하다고 생각해서 그 일을 하고 있는데요. 그래서 50억 정도로 기금을 마련해서 그 아이들을 돕고 있어요. 근데 어떤 일이 벌어졌냐면요. 그 아이들 중에 정말 어려운 아이들이 있었어요. 엄마랑 같이 고시원에 사는 아이가 있었어요. 항상 불평이 많은 아이였는데 처음으로 감사한 마음을 가지고 저한테 선물을 보내줬어요. 치약을. 그래서 저는 50억짜리 치약을 얻게 됐어요. 그래서 한 번 이빨을 닦을 때마다 1,000만 원짜리 이빨을 닦아요. 세상에 어떤 부자가 50억짜리 치약을 가질 수 있겠어요? 저는 정말 행복해졌어요. 이게 어떻게 보면 소냐 교수님께서 얘기하실 나 자신에게 친절을 베풀거나 다른 사람에게 친절을 베푸거나 이런 이야기가 아닌가 싶습니다. 결국엔 이제 지금 그 아이들이 중학교 1학년이 되었고 각자 이제 꿈을 가진 친구들도 있고 한데 앞으로도 이제 고등학교 졸업할 때까지 계속 후원을 하면서 그 아이들의 삶이 어떻게 바뀌는지에 대해서 교수님과 계속해서 추적해 나갈 계획입니다. 저는 기업을 하고 있어요. 사실 여러 가지 제 타이틀이 있어요. 뭐 배달의 민족을 창업한 사람, 우한영재들 회사의 대표, 뭐 코리아 스타트업 포럼의 의장, 그다음에 집에서는 한나 주아의 아빠, 여러 가지 타이틀이 있는데 사람마다 각자 타이틀과 역할들이 있는 것 같아요. 그러니까 저는 좀 기업을 하다 보니까 좀 단순하게 생각해 본다면은 이런 거죠. 사람들은 생산자와 소비자로 나뉘는 것 같아요. 역할이. 근데 그 모든 사람들이 그걸 가지고 있죠. 어떤 사람들은 교수님들도 컨텐츠들을 만들고 교육을 해야 되고 하는 생산자로서도 있고 저녁에는 쇼핑도 하고 음식도 먹으면서 소비자로서의 삶도 즐기는데 소비자로서의 삶은 굉장히 행복하고 즐거워요. 손님은 왕이다라고 하고 있고 서비스는 무조건 잘 되어 있는데 저희 생산자로서의 삶은 그렇게 행복하지 않은 것 같아요. 근데 하루에 8시간 정도를 우리는 생산을 하기 위해서 쓰는데 자는 시간 8시간 빼면은 사실은 깨어있는 시간의 절반을 생산자로서 사는 거예요. 그러면은 우리는 주말에 스트레스를 풀러 쇼핑을 하거나 이러면서 소비자로서의 행복을 만들지만 내가 정말 일을 하면서 생산자로서 그 시간에서 어떻게 행복을 만들지에 대해서도 같이 고민을 해봐야 된다라고 저는 생각하고 있어요. 그래서 이게 조너선 하이트라는 교수님께서 행복은 결국에는 관계에서 온다 라는 이야기를 했고 저 또한 여기에 대해서 무척이나 공감을 하고 있어요. 아까 말씀 주셨지만 직장 상사와의 관계가 얼마나 중요한지에 대해서도 말씀 주셨는데 그래서 저희 회사의 복지는 대부분은 관계를 어떻게 구성원과 구성원의 관계를 어떻게 건강하게 만들고 잘 만들 수 있는지에 대해서 많은 고민들을 하고 거기에 대해서 만들고 있어요. 그래서 우리나라에서는 아마 뭐 최초는 아니지만 그래도 손가락 안에 꼽힐 정도로 주 35시간제 그리고 주 4.5일제. 그래서 월요일 아침을 다 쉬어요. 월요일은 1시에 출근하고 있고 그다음에 뭐 여러 가지 정책들을 많이 만들어 나가고 있어요. 근데 이제 이런 정책들을 만들어 나가면서 저희는 사실 외부에서도 질문을 굉장히 많이 받고 있거든요. 회사를 하고 있으니까 너희 얼마나 잘 성장하고 있어. 근데 저희는 사실은 회사는 직원들의 행복을 위해서 만든 목적 자체는 될 수 없기 때문에 소비자들에게 무엇인가를 만들어내고 퍼포먼스를 내야 되는 것이 사실 목적이기 때문에 그 성과에 대해서도 굉장히 중요하게 생각하고 있죠. 그래서 일단 결론적으로 말씀드리면 저희 회사는 연간 한 70%씩 지금 잘 성장을 하고 있고 지금 한 1,200명 정도의 직원들이 같이 일하고 있어요. 그래서 굉장히 빨리 성장하는 회사로 지금 많은 분들에게도 인식이 되어 있는데 그래서 많은 분들이 질문이 와요. 그래서 드누브 교수님께서도 말씀하셨던 그런 웰빙에 투자하면 정말 퍼포먼스가 좋아지느냐, 이 질문에 대해서 굉장히 많은 기자님들에게 질문이 오고 저희도 이제 거기에 대해서 많이 생각해 보게 되는 거죠. 그러면은 이제 교수님들이나 많은 분들은 그렇게 말씀하실 수 있다라고 생각을 하고 있어요. 행복에 웰빙에 투자하면은 퍼포먼스가 좋아진다라고. 근데 사실은 여기에 계시는 많은 기업하시는 분들이 계실 텐데, 그러면 이 이야기를 듣고 바로 우리 직원들의 복지나 웰빙을 위해서 바로 투자를 할 수 있을까에 대한 결정을 할 때는 또 다른 또 변수들이 있는 것 같아요. 왜냐하면 기업은 분기 단위, 반기 단위, 연 단위로 평가를 받아요. 그리고 주가가 반영이 되는데, 웰빙에 투자하고 나서 그 다음에 돌아오는 퍼포먼스가 돌아오는 거는 이번 분기에 투자를 했다고 해서 이번 분기에 퍼포먼스가 좋아진다기가 굉장히 어려워요. 그러니까 저는 약간 R&D 투자 같은 거라고 생각이 들어요. 3년 뒤, 4년 뒤에 신기술을 개발하기 위해서 지금 무엇인가를 투자를 하는 것처럼 직원들, 구성원들의 웰빙에 투자하는 것은 저도 연관관계가 있다고 생각하고, 그거는 조금 더 시차가 있어서 좀 퍼포먼스가 나온다. 그래서 거기에 대한 연구가 있으면은 어떨까라는 생각을 하고 있고, 드누브 교수님께서 혹시 연구를 하신다면은 제 이름도 조금 넣어주시면은 네, 감사하겠습니다. 그래서 그런 생각을 해봤고요. 네, 네, 그래서 오늘 저도 뭐 이렇게 교수님들과 함께 이야기 나눌 수 있어서 무척 영광이라고 생각하고 있고, 제 얘기는 이 정도로 마치고 이 다음에 또 같이 또 토론하는 시간에서 또 더 많은 이야기를 나누겠습니다. 감사합니다. 네.
네, 지금은 제가 한국말로 할 텐데 김봉진 대표님은 다른 사람을 행복하게 하는 게 자기가 행복해진다라는 걸 보여주는 살아있는 좋은 example이라고 생각합니다. He is a good example of making others happy makes me happy. 너무 감사드리고요. 그 질문하신 내용, actually he had a question for Professor Neve. Happiness management is like R&D. It takes time. So, is there any research showing the similarity between happiness management and R&D, something like that?
Well, first of all, I want to emphasize the fantastic points made by you and congratulate you on the fantastic, I mean, it feels like for you it's natural, these well-being interventions that you're implementing in your company, which is fantastic. But your intuition about the well-being returns not being immediate but taking some time, I agree and I disagree with. I think some of the returns are pretty much immediately. So for example, in our work with British Telecom, you will have seen changes in well-being from one week to another, having immediate returns on weekly sales. So some aspects of well-being will translate pretty much immediately into gains well-being. But some of the investment into employee well-being will take a longer time. And there's two aspects of employee well-being leading to performance that I think take a longer time. And those are, one, retention, but even before that, gaining talent into the firm. So for example, if you invest in employee well-being, then it may help your employees immediately in terms of doing better. But over time, your company will also generate a positive culture that will spread and have a reputation outside the company. That will allow you to do one important thing, which is to attract better talent in the first place. And so, for example, there's companies like, you may not be familiar with it, but it's called Glassdoor, which is where employees can anonymously talk about the company that they work for. Nowadays, when people are looking for jobs and have the fortune to have multiple possibilities, they will actually get a good feel for the companies that they're applying to and potentially have different offers from. They will choose the company, not just the one that pays most, but also the one that instills most purpose and has the strongest positive well-being culture. So investing in employee well-being will in the long run also make you more of an attractive employer. That's one thing. But at the end of the process, and very importantly for the long run results, is the impact on employee turnover. I mentioned it very briefly in the discussion now. There's not much research done on this, but I would love to work with you to see whether we can pick up on this at a large scale, which is the following. If you have a company that has higher degrees of employee well-being because of the fantastic interventions like our colleague here, over time, that will make sure that your people are more engaged and happy at work and will stay longer. So I'm willing to put money on the following bet, which is that companies with higher employee well-being, the average turnover will be, say, 8 years or 9 years for the average employee before they leave and depart for somewhere else. Whereas companies with lower employee well-being, the average turnover will be, say, 4 years or 5 years. But anybody who works in HR knows the cost associated with people, good people, leaving your company is absolutely massive, because it means that you need to recruit and find replacements. You have to train them. They have to grow and reach that the learning curve before they become fully effective, which takes time again. So the resources, the effort required to get people up to speed, replace people that have left for maybe awful reasons, is really, really time-consuming and resource-intensive. So investing in employee well-being has immediate benefits, but over time, I think both on the recruitment front and on the retention front, those are where the long-term benefits kick in the long run. So I really want to emphasize that, because that hasn't quite come through yet, but I think your instincts are really spot on.
Thank you. Our next panel is Eason Gunn. He is the CEO of Viva Republic. He has a very interesting career path. He was trained as a dentist and actually worked as a dentist for a long time. And he was not happy with his job, and he quit and started his own business. And he created TOS, a very convenient money wiring service, which is highly successful in Korea. So he will be sharing his thoughts and experiences.
소개 감사합니다. 저는 약간 얘기를 들어보니까 여기서 제가 좀 소수 의견일 것 같습니다. 그래서 좀 그런 좀 약간 other perspective를 제공한다고 생각해 주시면 좋을 것 같습니다. 일단 두 교수님 강연을 잘 봤는데, 일단 소넨 교수님의 행복에 대한 어프로치랑 프레임워크에 대해서 조금 제 생각이 든 것은, 그러니까 지금 이게 해피네스랑 어떤 어트리뷰 이거를 이제 코릴레이션을 계속 찾으셨는데, 이게 엔도제네티한 문제가 있을 것 같다. 그러니까 한국말로는 이제 내생성의 문제라고 하죠. 이게 돈 때문에 행복해진 건지 행복해서 돈을 더 버는 건지 기본적으로 알 수가 없기 때문에 뭐가 cause고 뭐가 result인지 알 수 없는 문제이지 않을까라는 생각이 좀 들고요. 그리고 제가 느끼기엔 저희도 이제 employee happiness가 굉장히 중요하고 저희가 되게 잘 하고 있다고 생각하는데, 해피네스를 실제 어떤 목표와 골로 생각하는 사람들은 못 본 것 같아요. 저는. 그러니까 해피네스는 그냥 want죠. 갖고 싶다, 행복해지고 싶어. 그러니까 pursuit of happiness가 골이지, happiness가 골인 사람은 전 못 봤거든요. 나는 해피의 지수를 7에서 9로 올릴 거야라는 사람은 못 봤거든요. 그래서 거기에 어떤 스트래티지를 도입한다는 게 약간 조금 awkward하다라는 생각을 했고요. 근데 이제 거기서 보여주신 해피네스 스트래티지는 다 저도 되게 공감이 가는 주제였다고 생각을 하는데, 저는 사실 가장 크리티컬한 하나에 집중해서 실제로 엄청나게 큰 임팩트를 만드는 데 집중해야 된다고 생각합니다. 모든 스트래티지가 그렇지만 여러 개를 하는 것보다는 하나에 포커스 해가지고 그거를 엄청나게 잘하는 게 이제 임팩트가 훨씬 크기 때문에. 근데 저는 현대 사회에서의 해피네스의 임팩트 중에 제일 큰 거는 사실은 인간이 목적 의식을 갖고 사는 존재다. 그러니까 목적이 이끄는 삶이 인간을 행복하게 만드는 거라는 점이 좀 바뀌어야 되는 부분이라고 생각을 개인적으로 합니다. 왜냐하면은 사실은 이제 인류 대부분의 역사 기간 동안 인류는 목적이 이끄는 삶을 살았다고 생각해요. 자기 자신을 넘어서는 어떤 가치에 헌신하기 위해서, 뭐 평등이 됐든 뭐 자유가 됐든 아니면 뭐 영광이 됐든 뭐 그리스 시대부터요. 근데 2차 대전 때 이제 너무 엄청난 인간성의 이제 상실이 있었고, 뭐 여러 가지 뭐 제노사이드가 있었지 않습니까? 그래서 그러면서 목적을 더 이상 인간의 생명보다 상위에 있는 어떤 목적이 이끄는 삶을 사는 게 죄악시되는 환경이 되면서 되게 행복해지기 어려워진 게 아닌가라는 생각을 개인적으로 하고 있기 때문에, 삶의 목적성을 회복해주는, 즉 인간에 대한 컨셉을 바꾸는 것, 즉 목적 없이는 인간은 행복해질 수 없다라는 스테이트먼트를 우리 모두가 공감대를 형성하는 게 제가 봤을 때는 행복에 가장 큰 임팩트를 미치는 가장 빠른 길이라고 생각을 합니다. 왜냐하면 이제 소개해 주신 것처럼 저는 치과 의사 할 때 물론 이제 지금은 저희 회사가 이제 거의 기업 가치가 3조고 임직원이 400명 정도 되고 되게 안정화돼서 행복하지만 사업 초기에 굉장히 불안하고 리스크 테이킹 엄청 하고 빚도 개인적으로 많이 졌지만 뭐 매달 몇 천만 원씩 버는 잡을 그 치과 회사를 버리고 이렇게 온 거는 그냥 제 삶의 어떤 콜링을 찾았기 때문이었거든요. It's not about 더 그렇기 때문에 이제 좀 그 정도 될 것 같고요. 그 사실 조금 그래서 그거 관련해서 얘기를 해보면 그 저희 얀 교수님께서 말씀 주신 대부분의 내용에 저는 에코하고 싶고요. 너무 맞는 말씀이라고 생각합니다. 왜냐하면은 저희 팀에서는 그래서 어떻게 하냐면 이제 채용을 할 때 이분이 자신의 삶의 목적을 찾았는지를 확인하는 데 되게 중점을 많이 둡니다. 그러니까 제가 봤을 때 인간이 행복해지는 길은 그냥 되게 단순하게 두 가지인 것 같거든요. 하나는 좋아하는 일을 찾고 두 번째는 그냥 그걸 하는 건데 찾는 것도 어렵고 하는 건 더 어려운 것 같거든요. 그래서 좋아하는 일을 찾은 사람들은 정말 럭키한 거고 그래서 저희는 그래서 이 사람이 왜 일을 하는가에 되게 집중을 합니다. 그러니까 좋아해서 하는 건지 정말 이게 즐거운 건지 그러면은 와서 일을 그냥 하게 된다, 즐겁게 하게 된다라고 생각을 하기 때문에 그래서 저희가 그러한 분들을 모셨을 때 가장 성과를 내는 여러 가지 이제 핵심 엘리먼트들을 지금 회사에서 늘 찾고 있는데 저희가 확인한 거는 6가지의 요소가 이분들한테 굉장히 큰 동기부여 요소로 작동한다는 걸 발견했습니다. 많은 것들이 이미 교수님 연구에서 논의가 됐지만 저희가 하나 더 찾은 거는 미션도 굉장히 중요했었습니다. 기업이 가지는 미션과 righteousness, 공정함이 굉장히 큰 영향을 미치는 걸 발견했고 그 외에 그 업무의 챌린지 그리고 동료들 얼마나 자극적인 동료, 패셔네이트한 동료가 있느냐 그 다음에 당연히 보상, 페이 그 다음에 문화와 동료 관계 그 다음에 얼마나 정말 성과를 잘 내는 회사에 있느냐 이런 게 되게 그 6가지 요소 중에 3가지가 걸리면 있으면 계속 일을 하고 2가지 정도밖에 안 남으면 회사를 떠나더라고요. 되게 놀랍게도. 그래서 저희는 그걸 내부적으로 계속 연구를 하고 있고 어떤 모티베이션 요소들이 있는지 발견해서 계속 다양한 자극을 주기 위해 노력을 하고 있는데요. 근데 여기 연구에도 나왔지만 제가 또 이제 포인트아웃 하고 싶은 것은 워킹 아워는 행복과 임플로이먼트 세티스팩션에 별로 연관관계가 없었다는 점이었던 것 같습니다. 조금 그 스테이트먼트는 약간 달랐던 것 같긴 한데 저는 연구 결과 아까 그래서 볼 때 잡 세티스팩션의 코릴레이션이 제일 낮았던 게 워크 라이프 밸런스하고 워킹 아워스 그리고 잡 시큐리티 직업 안전성 일하는 시간 이런 게 실제로 임플로이들의 만족도에 그렇게 연관관계가 높지 않다라는 점이 굉장히 중요한 파인딩이라고 생각을 하거든요. 실제로 뭐 우리나라에서도 조사해 보면은 대기업을 퇴사하는 지금 그렇게 열심히 취준해서 들어간 대기업을 3년 내에 44%가 퇴직하고 있는데 그들이 퇴직하는 이유 1번이 존경할 수 없는 동료와 상사거든요. 72%가 그 이유 하나 때문에 거의 나오는 걸로 나와서 그래서 오히려 지금 되게 한국에서 되게 트렌디하게 얘기되고 있는 워크 라이프 밸런스나 워킹 아워가 과연 정말 임플로이들의 만족도에 영향을 그렇게 높은가? 물론 아주 소수자의 얘기일 수는 있지만은 저희 뭐 300명 넘는 350명 되는 임직원분들은 일 시간이 긴 거가 자율적으로 선택한 거기만 하면은 훨씬 오히려 일을 못하게 하는 걸 되게 싫어하는 분들이 많거든요. 내가 이걸 뭔가 하고 싶어서 온 건데 왜 일을 못하게 하냐 뭐 이런 거에 가까워서 그래서 저희의 좀 관점을 좀 말씀을 드리면은 저희는 가장 근본적으로 생각하는 펀더멘탈한 프린시플의 차이는 인간은 원래 일을 좋아한다. 인간은 일을 좋아하는데 2가지 때문에 안 되는 것 같다. 하나는 일을 도저히 집중할 수 없게 만드는 안 좋은 요소들이 회사에 너무 많은 거죠. 뭐 예를 들면은 뭐 잔소리 혹은 뭐 이해할 수 없는 일, 왜 해야 되는지 모르는 일, 이메일 맨날 끝에 CEO 지시사항입니다. 빠르게 처리해 주세요. 뭐 이런 거라든지 뭐 동료와의 관계에서 존경할 수 없는 상사 이런 것들이 오히려 문제가 돼서 일에 집중을 못 하는 거지. 원래 노동은 재밌으면서도 생산적인 인간의 유일한 활동이라고 저희는 생각을 기본적으로 합니다. 그래서 그게 첫 번째고. 그래서 인간은 일을 좋아해. 그래서 노동의 본래 의미를 회복시켜 주면 평가나 보상 제도가 없어도 사람들은 일에 집중하게 된다라는 게 저희의 가정입니다. 오히려 너무 일에 집중을 해서 너무 재밌으니까요. 오히려 강제로 쉬게 만들어야 될 정도가 된다. 이게 저희의 가장 근본적인 차이라서 CEO로서 리더의 잡은 업무상 일에 집중할 수 없게 만드는 요소들을 적극적으로 제거해내는 것이 가장 중요하다라고 저희는 그러면 뭐 어떤 리워드가 없어도 열심히 일한다 이런 건데 이게 저희가 좀 말이 된다고 생각하는 이유는 저희가 지난 2년 동안 뭐 그게 다는 아니지만 뭐 매출은 거의 20배가 늘었고 기업 가치도 거의 20배 가까이 늘었지만 저희는 개인별 성과 평가를 한 번도 한 적이 없습니다. 개인별 KPI도 없거든요. 말씀하신 대로 그 인센티브를 모든 사람들이 전사의 목표 하나만 달성하면 모두가 동일한 리워드를 받습니다. 그런데도 불구하고 그런 목표가 달성되는 걸 보면 좀 있다 이런 거고 그리고 이제 두 번째로 이제 인간이 원래 일을 좋아하는데 일을 싫어하게 만드는 이유 중에 하나는 내가 좋아하는 일이 아닌 경우인 것 같아요. 내가 좋아하는 일이 아닌데 사회의 기대, 어머니의 기대, 동료의 기대, 친구들의 기대 때문에 싫어하는 일이지만 그냥 기업에 취직할 수밖에 없었던 그런 상황들. 그래서 그런 거는 첫 두 가지인데 하나는 커리어 디벨롭먼트를 통해서 그 사람이 진짜 트루 네이처가 뭔지 뭘 원하는지 찾아줘야 되는 것 같고 두 번째는 사실 그게 다들 있는데 그걸 용기 있게 직업으로 선택하기가 어려운 거거든요. 그래서 그 직업 선택의 두려움을 줄여줘야 된다. 그게 뭐 잡세큐리티라고 저희는 생각을 하는데 예를 들면 제가 아는 어떤 제 친구는 정말로 대기업에 다니는데 너무너무 일하기 싫어하는데 이 친구는 퇴근하고 사진 찍는 걸 너무 좋아하거든요. 근데 이 친구는 그럼 제가 봤을 땐 사진사가 돼야 되는데 사진가가 되기엔 밥벌이가 너무 좀 그래서 이제 그런 두려움 그리고 타인의 시선들 사진 작가 뭐 이런 안정적이지 않아 보이는 그런 사회 시선 때문에 결국 용기 있는 선택을 못해서 그런 거다. 그래서 제 생각에는 그 사람이 원래 좋아하는 걸 찾아주는 게 중요하다. 그리고 원래 좋아하는 걸 이미 찾아서 하는 분들은 추가적인 인센티브가 없어도 너무너무 열심히 일을 하신다. 대신 조직에서 일에 집중할 수 없는 요소들을 많이 제거하는 게 중요하다라고 생각하고요. 그래서 저희는 복지제도가 많이 디벨롭이 돼 있는데 저희 복지제도의 핵심은 어떨 때 팀원들이 업무에 집중하지 못하는가에 되게 집중화되어 있습니다. 예를 들면 저희가 가지고 있는 복지제도 중에 이제 입사하면 모든 임직원들에게 이제 무이자로 주택담보대출이나 전세자금대출을 1억을 그냥 회사에서 지원을 하는데 그 이유는 많은 인플로이들이 와이프나 이제 혹은 뭐 남편분 때문에 우리 집 옮겨야 되는데 전세자금 어떡하지? 이런 고민 때문에 업무에 집중을 대부분 못합니다. 실제로. 그렇기 때문에 그냥 1억을 드렸고 뭐 그게 다 해결은 안 됐지만 저희는 3억 5억 이렇게 드려서 실제로 집 문제를 완전히 머릿속에서 해결해 드리려고 하고 두 번째는 또 인플로이들이 카페에 가면 업무에 집중이 잘 된다라고 해서 그럼 접근성을 높여야겠다는 생각에 회사 안에 아예 카페를 들여와서 아예 정규직으로 바리스타 분들을 다 채용해서 운영을 하고 있고 되게 만족도와 집중도 굉장히 올라갔고요. 또 일부 여성 임직원 분들께서 뭐 스타킹에 나갔는데 잠깐 편의점에 가서 사오고 이러는데 시간이 너무 오래 걸린다. 너무 불편하다. 그래서 편의점을 회사 안에 만들었습니다. 그래서 다 완전 무료예요. 그게 이제 거기에 이제 뭐 구급 약도 있고 간단히 끼니 때우고 싶은 사람들은 뭐 삼각김밥 이런 것도 먹을 수 있게 돼 있는데 이제 이런 웰빙을 만들었더니 진짜로 일을 못 하게 되는 요소들이 줄어서 일에 엄청난 생산성을 만들어냈다라는 거는 저희가 뭐 아직 작은 예지만 만들어가고 있다고 생각을 해서 뭐 정리를 하자면은 두 분 그리고 이제 대표님의 이제 말씀에 되게 에코잉 하는데 약간 중요한 그 관점의 차이들이 몇 개만 있어도 굉장히 다른 인간의 어떤 동기부여를 찾을 수 있다고 생각합니다.
네. If you have a job opening, let me know.
We always do. We always have.
Yeah. I think there are at least a couple of questions to be addressed by Sonia and Professor Neve. The first question was about the direction of causality. He mentioned that success and happiness can go together, and the direction can go both ways. So, how can we know that happiness actually causes success?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. We can't know for sure. So what researchers do, we try to what's called triangulate. So we look at 3 different kinds of studies. So we can look at correlations. So happier people are also richer. We also do longitudinal studies. So people who are happier today are healthier in 10 years. So we know that health 10 years later does not cause happiness now, but there could be other variables. And then we also do experiments, which are really the gold standard to establish causality, but they are problematic as well. So Mostly what I do are experiments, and I mentioned experiment, you make people happier, and they show more creativity. So, but that's only happiness in the moment. So we can never really be 100% sure, but when we can do these 3 types of studies, we can be more and more confident.
Okay.
I would like to build on what Sonia just said. So your point about causality is very important. So it can run in both directions. But the great work by Sonia and colleagues, and I would argue that our team has been doing, has tried to disentangle the relationship quite a bit. So sure, it's a dynamic relationship. If you're happy, you'll be more productive. Being more productive will give you a sense of feedback coming back from clients that will help your well-being. But you know, I've been very excited being able to share with you the new study in collaboration with British Telecom. And that is, I think, the first field study in a large scale where we try and disentangle the relationship between the well-being leading to customer satisfaction and taking apart or taking away the return impact. The way we've done it, and bear with me for a second, is through what we call an instrumental variable analysis. It's a quasi-experiment in the way that Sonia has done many in the lab in California. And you may recall the map of the call centers around the UK, and the experimental setup here is the weather. In the United Kingdom, people care a lot about the weather, and the weather is different between different places around the UK. So some of the call centers are way up north in Scotland, and some are in the south of England, Dorset and other places, Devon, where the weather is better. And so what we've been able to leverage, to use as a quasi-experimental shock, is the weather differences around each one of the call centers. And so what we're measuring here is, this is very detailed and it's well explained in the paper, but the weather differences between call centers, we use them to look at how they impact the mood or the happiness of employees. And so we pick up differences in employee happiness from one week to another, in part driven by weather differences between these call centers. And why is this important? Because think of the weather then as sort of an exogenous shock, as an intervention to try and raise happiness, then see how it influences productivity, how they do with customers on the call. Now, the important thing here for this experiment, if you're still with me, is that the calls, the customers, come in from around the country. So the calls to the call center are not local, they're from around the country. So only the weather shock is local and only shocks, if you will, positively or negatively, the employee well-being of the employees at the call center. It doesn't impact the customers around the country. So we've been able to, this is very technical, but econometrically speaking, we've been able to use this as an experimental shock onto the well-being of the employees to look at the net, the causal impact of employee well-being and productivity without the return impact. Anyway, so that's a long story short to say that top-end academics like Sonia and our colleagues and ourselves, I would hope, are able to disentangle the relationship, the two-way relationship.
Yeah. The second question is more fundamental, I think. He's asking the work-life balance. Is that really important? Is that really crucial
for the well-being? Yeah.
Yeah.
But you'll probably have a lot to say. But I feel strongly about this question, and I know in that ranking of 12 job characteristics, work-life balance or hours worked didn't come up very strongly, and so you picked up on this really well. And you're obviously right. When people find a job interesting and are intrinsically motivated, and they love their colleagues around the job, then they may want to work long hours because there's no longer work-life balance, it's work-life continuum. So essentially work and life kind of merge together because they identify and love what they're doing and they love the colleagues, and it's much more than just the pay associated with it. At the same time, I want to pause and caution as well. As you noticed from a few slides before that, not everybody is engaged with the work. So this idea that they love their job, identify with it and love their colleagues is true for lots of people, but not everyone, far from everyone. And so most people do still see job or work as a transactional thing. In terms of, I spend my time with you on the job, I do my job, I get paid for it, but really most of my life has to do with my children, my work, my husband, and the stuff I do in the community for my family. So do not sort of push it too far. For example, that graph I showed you with the 12 dimensions, it was correlating it to and predictive of job satisfaction. If I change the measure from job satisfaction to life satisfaction, then suddenly work-life balance becomes much more powerful in that equation. So we didn't have enough time to go into too much detail, but if we're thinking as an employer, say you're inspired and exciting CEOs of wonderful companies, if you care about the life satisfaction of your employees rather than just the job satisfaction, then you'd see that work-life balance does come out more strongly and that we need to take it into account. Hence the importance of flexi-time, autonomy, allowing them to better combine aspects of work and life. So for example, by allowing for working a day at home in the week, for example, it will allow your employees to balance more work and life pressures at the same time. For example, to be able to bring a kid to the dentist, no pun intended, and these kind of things. I think the ideal outcome is to be able to drive your workplace to be interesting and engaging and a fantastic social capital in the workspace so that people see it as work-life continuum and enjoy being at work and don't count the hours. That's the ideal thing. But I would always leave the option on the table for the employees themselves to choose to work longer hours if they so desire to, but to give them also the option to spend time at home and arrange their work-life balance in a way that suits them best.
Can I?
Sonia, do you want to add something, Mr. Pong?
I don't think I have anything to add. I agree with everything. By the way, I have 4 children, so I live that, what he's talking about, the importance of work-life balance. And you know, being a professor is a great job because we have a lot of flexibility, so I could take my kid to the dentist anytime I want to, but most people don't have that luxury. So
Sure.
yeah, I agree.
I totally agree that it should be a gift, not from the. It shouldn't be taken. So it should employee의 선택이어야지. 저도 빼앗아 가지고 그거를 무조건 이래라고 했으면 당연히 makes no sense. 근데 이제 더 중요한 거는 이게 아까 이제 저도 사실 오기 전에 교수님의 아티클들을 몇 개 더 봤는데 이제 only 20% 정도의 사람들만 실제로 컴퍼니에 인게이지 되고 80% large portion of people는 안 된다 이런 얘기 주셨는데 제 가정은 그 80%가 회사에서 만족과 그리고 삶의 만족도가 높지 않은 이유는 행복하지 못하게 만드는 요소가 회사에 너무 많기 때문이고 대부분 그거는 동료와 상사의 문제인 걸로 이해되고 뭐 뷰로크라시도 있고 뭐 politics도 말도 안 되게 있다 그러면 이제 그런 거지 실제로 그들이 인게이지 못하는 이유가 by the nature로 원래 본성이 그렇다라고 말하기는 어려울 수 있다고 생각을 합니다. 그래서 만약에 뭐 교수님들의 삶을 좋아하는 분들이 교수님이 되고 만약에 되게 인커리징하고 재밌는 일을 하고 싶은 분들이 회사에 있다고 한다면은 오히려 반대로 80%의 임직원들이 회사에 인게이지가 되고 오히려 20%만이 이제 내가 이게 좋아하는 일인가, 내가 정말 즐겁나, 뭐 이 사람들하고 같이 있는 게 좋은가 이렇게 되지 않을까 이런 생각을 갖고 있습니다.
네, 저도 조금 얘기를.
네.
그 드분유 교수님께서도 말씀해 주셨는데 어떤 여러 가지 변수들이 일을 하고 있는 사람들의 행복 지수에 영향을 미친다고 그랬잖아요. 근데 사실은 또 기업을 하는 입장에서 보면은 개인의 퍼포먼스가 좋아지는 게 기업 전체 퍼포먼스가 좋아지는 것과 또 연관관계가 약할 수가 있어요. 그러니까 개인은 굉장히 열심히 일하지만 회사는 잘못된 방향으로 열심히 일해서 망할 수도 있거든요. 네. 그러니까 훨씬 더 다양한 변수들이 회사의 퍼포먼스에는 적용이 돼요. 그러니까 전략을 어떻게 짜느냐, 경쟁자가 누구 있냐, 시장 상황은 어떠냐, 정부와의 관계는 어떠냐 이런 다양한 변수들이 작용이 되기 때문에 사실은 그것 하나만으로 기업이 복지나 워라밸에 투자를 해서 잘 된다라고 생각하기에는 약간은 오류가 있을 수도 있다라는 생각을 가지고 있어요. 근데 그럼에도 불구하고 우리가 이런 것들에 대해서 관심을 가지고 더 많이 해야 된다는 건 제 생각은 사실은 과학적으로 수치화되는 여러 가지 정량적인 데이터도 있지만 사실은 좀 더 철학적으로도 접근할 필요도 있다고 생각을 하고 있어요. 그러니까 칸트가 이런 얘기를 했어요. 인간을 수단이 아닌 목적으로 대하라. 그러니까 이 말은 무엇이냐면은 워라밸을 좋게 했는데 회사의 퍼포먼스가 좋아졌어. 그러면은 워라밸에 투자를 했는데도 회사의 퍼포먼스가 안 좋아졌으면 그분들에게 책임을 물을 것인가? 그렇잖아요. 수단으로 썼기 때문에. 그래서 그냥 목적 자체로 써야 된다는 거죠. 그래서 저는 기업가든 거기에서 일하는 노동자든 사실 인간 대 인간으로 서로를 대하는 게 중요하다고 생각을 해요. 그러니까 이런 워라밸을 증진시키고 웰빙에 투자를 하는 것은 그냥 퍼포먼스를 높이기 위한 수단이 아니라 인간과 인간의 기본적인 예의이다. 그리고 퍼포먼스를 높이기 위해서는 아까 말씀드렸던 것처럼 전략을 잘 짜야 되고 시장 상황에서 잘 읽어야 되고 정부와의 관계도 잘 맞아야 되고 가장 중요한 건 운도 좋아야 된다. 이런 말씀 좀 드리고 싶었습니다. 네.
네, 네, 감사합니다. Now is the time for open discussion. We're gonna take questions and comment from the audience, and the audience wrote down many questions through their smartphones, and I have the list of the questions, and I chose one question. The question will appear, and two professors may answer to this question. I know there are many HR managers in this room, and they are really interested in hearing your thoughts about this question. So what programs are there you can recommend to train the managers to make happy workplaces, especially personal behaviors?
I'm happy to go first. I care specifically a lot about this point, so I'm really pleased that the question is being raised. So you'll remember from these different dimensions of work which one drives employee satisfaction most. It is the social capital, the relationship on the job. Within that, it's the one with the manager, the line manager specifically, that is particularly important. People don't leave their jobs, they leave their bosses. And so with that in mind, I really appreciate this question. The question then becomes, how can you improve managerial skills, empathy of line managers, especially, if you will, at the mid-level management or even the front-facing aspects of management? Because the top management, they tend to go to fancy executive education classes and get all kind of cool leadership tools and management classes to try and train them and become better leaders. But where where it's most important is throughout the organization and very much at the coal face, the front-facing aspects of the organization. So what can one do? There isn't much innovation on this front. It is, I think, unexplored territory for many HR managers and many companies and many academic. There's not much academic work on this either. What I know of is I know of one really good evaluation. It's done in an American or Canadian firm. The program was called STAR, and STAR. It stands for something, but I've forgotten what it was. Anyway, I can share the work with you. It's the one intervention I think was properly evaluated that has managers and employees come together in a program that sits with them together, but also separately, to generate line managers' empathy and allow them to work more concretely with their immediate team to see for opportunities for enhancing operations and giving more autonomy to the employees of the team, to then reschedule and think through, from a manager's perspective, give them the empathy to take the position of their staff members to see how they appreciate work and how it can be improved. But what I would very much, on other potential interventions that I would recommend is, first and foremost, there's now 21st century technology tools that I think will help. So we think often of AI, artificial intelligence, as a threat to employee well-being or jobs in general, but there's also opportunities there. And so there's one company, it's a startup in New York, they do fantastic work. They're called Butterfly AI, and they will work throughout the organization with managers and do this pulsing of employee well-being, the way that we've used it at BT. And then they leverage these data coming in by providing tailor-made advice to managers throughout the organization, not just top-level management. Building on the data that comes in, they will then leverage the knowledge base about what makes for a good manager and how can you be more supportive as a manager. And then they will feed that information to specific managers with relevance to the team and the employee well-being of their team. So I think that 21st century HR will move away from clunky, once-a-year big surveys to more sort of pulses, more regular soft touch, light touch measurement of well-being in teams, and then feed it in a tailor-made way to managers at the top of each team. So not just to CEOs seeing annual or quarterly reports about employee well-being and the drivers. No, it'll go straight to the managers, and it will be at the team level almost driven. which in turn will then also allow, and this particular butterfly tool does this, allow for anonymous feedback and anonymous channels as well. So if there is something going wrong within teams or units, then we need to have the tools, and we can, through digital tools, the opportunity be given to people to anonymously express their frustrations and try and come to a resolution and solution with their line managers or senior line managers in a channel through technology, for example, that allows them to have a conversation or express their issues anonymously. Because a lot of the issues with line management problems is that the people in the team, the employees, are wary of retribution. They're scared, they're afraid of actually expressing themselves because obviously the line manager has power over them. And so you need ways also of allowing for anonymous feedback and a channel to try and resolve these issues anonymously. And so I think the 21st century digital tools, potentially AI-driven, will help improve managers and allow for that feedback to come through more frequently and in terms of anonymity. So it's honest. So I think those are avenues that are being worked upon and that you should look into.
My research is really more relevant to individual interventions, both at work but also at home, right? If you make people happier in their family lives, in their home lives, they're going to show up to work more energetic, more motivated, more inspired to do a better job. I'll just answer the question by just telling you about one intervention that we just finished with. We are working with a company in San Francisco, and employees were asked to engage in either 3 more kind interactions every week for a month, or 3 more social interactions every week for a month. So next week, engage in 3 social interactions at work that you don't normally engage in, right? So 3 more conversations with your colleagues, or do 3 acts of kindness for your colleagues or for your manager at work. And we succeeded in making people happier at work and more energetic and more productive. And it didn't matter whether they were being kind to others or they were just being more social. So it turns out just connecting with other people at the office, just talking to people, more conversations, more interactions, was highly beneficial. So those are the kinds of, that's the kind of work that I do, really more at the individual level. But we need to kind of come at this problem at different levels, right? Both in the individual level and the company level, and really at the societal policy level as well.
Okay. I chose this next question because it's a very practical question, and the two CEOs can answer this question, I think. 웰빙에 투자하기 좋은 타이밍 혹은 조건이 있을까요? 언제? 그러니까 처음부터 회사가 웰빙에 투자해야 되느냐, 아니면 어떤 적절한 타이밍이 있느냐, 그런 말인 것 같고요. 그다음에 이게 수행에 영향을 주는데 어떤 측면에 영향을 주는 건가? 뭐 이런 되게 테크니컬한 질문인데 많은 회사 관계자분들이 관심이 있을 것 같아요. So is there a good timing for investing on employees' happiness? All the times, at the beginning, in the middle?
이 부분에 대해서는 아까도 말씀드린 것처럼 여러 가지 사회적 연구가 있다 하더라도 기업 측면에서는 사실은 웰빙에 대한 투자와 퍼포먼스의 연관관계가 없다라고 생각하시는 게 훨씬 더 좋아요. 왜냐하면 웰빙에 투자를 했는데 퍼포먼스가 안 좋아지면은 어떤 일이 벌어지냐면 배신감이 들어요. 내가 이렇게 잘해줬는데 성과가 안 났어요. 그러면서 미워지기 시작하거든요. 그러니까 수많은 회사들이 그 점에서 굉장히 실수를 많이 해요. 처음에는 구성원들에게 잘해주려고 여러 가지를 투자를 하고 했는데 누가 뭐 돈 띄어먹고 도망가기도 하고, 저희 회사 같은 경우는 책값을 무제한으로 지원해 주는데 책값 가지고 카드깡 하시는 분들도 계시고, 그럼 얼마나 마음이 아파요. 그게 얼마 안 될 수도 있지만 사실은 굉장히 많이 배신감이 들거든요. 그러니까는 그런 것들을 내려놓기 위해서라도 아까 말씀드렸던 것처럼 그냥 이 2가지의 연관관계를 제외하고서 우리는 그냥 인간이 인간에게 잘해주는 것이 더 중요하다라는 생각을 가지고, 퍼포먼스에 관련돼서는 회사가 전략이라던가 방향, 그다음에 현금 확보 이런 것들에 그게 훨씬 더 퍼포먼스에 중요하기 때문에 그렇게 가는 게 중요하다 생각하고 있고요. 아까 교수님 말씀하셨던 것처럼 그렇게 되면은 회사가 소문이 나서 좋은 인재들이 많이 들어와요. 네, 그래서 저는 지금 저랑 같이 일하시는 분들은 제가 진짜 존경하는 분들이 저랑 같이 막 일을 하고 있어요. 너무 신나게. 그래서 그런 좋은 인재들이 그런 것들을 들으면서 계속 들어오기 때문에 그게 훨씬 더 중요하지 않을까? 그래서 어떤 적절한 타이밍에 투자를 한다라는 것보다는 그냥 꾸준히 하는 것이 중요한 것 같고, 아까 말씀드렸던 것처럼 이게 어떻게 보면은 비용이 드는 투자가 아닐 수도 있어요. 예. 그러니까는 그냥 꼭 돈이 드는 투자라고 생각하지 마시고 여러 가지 그냥 관계에 관련돼서, 예를 들어서 이런 거죠. 서로 인사받고 싶으면 인사를 먼저 하자라는 캠페인을 한다거나, 인사를 서로 먼저 하는 것만으로도 굉장히 회사의 행복 지수가 높아지거든요. 이건 돈이 하나도 안 들어요. 예, 이런 것들도 할 수 있고 다양한 투자를 할 수 있어서, 일단은 경영진들 분들께서 이런 강의 교수님들 책들을 많이 읽으시고 작게 하나씩 적용해 보시면 좋을 것 같습니다.
혹시 이승건 대표님 뭐
저희는 뭐 되게 비슷한데 조금 다른 관점인데요. 저희는 항상 먼저 할수록 좋다라고 생각을 합니다. 그러니까 이게 이제 보통 이제 컨셉이 회사가 이제 좀 돈도 벌고 뭐 이익도 조금 날 것 같고 할 때 이제 보통 문화도 신경 쓰고 웰빙을 신경 쓰고 이렇게 되는 것 같은데, 오히려 저희는 반대인 것 같아요. 회사가 돈이 없는데도 불구하고 뭐 예를 들면은 저희가 그 무이자 1억 대출을 실행했을 때 매달 회사 그 손실액이 거의 뭐 수십억이었거든요. 예, 근데 그거를 이제 임직원들도 다 알고요. 기본적으로 그런 상황에서 이런 커밋먼트를 보여주는 게 이제 굉장한 메시지이기도 하고, 그래서 저는 무조건 웰빙에 더 투자를 먼저 할수록 성과가 무조건 콜레이션이 저는 굉장히 높다고 생각합니다. 그래서 저희는 항상 더 선제적으로 투자를 하고자 하고요. 그게 그래서 뭐 저희는 어떻게 보면은 가능할 때 하지 말고 필요할 때 하자라는 입장에 가까워요. 그래서 필요한데 돈이 없으면 돈을 가지고 와서 할 일이지, 가능한 때 하는 것보다는 항상 그게 더 낫다고 생각하고 있습니다. 그래서 웰빙에 굉장히 투자를 많이 하면 그게 이제 파격적이고 정말로 회사가 임직원들을 어떻게 생각하고 사랑하는지를 느낄 수 있을수록 굉장히 파워풀한 이펙트로 돌아온다라고 저희는 생각하고 있습니다.
저는 그 타이밍보다 더 중요한 게 있는 것 같아요. 그러니까는 이런 정책들을 만들 때 다른 회사가 하고 있는 걸 하지 마세요. 네, 새로운 걸 하세요. 그래야지만 구직자들한테 그게 마케팅 포인트가 돼요. 근데 저희가 지금 주 35시간제를 얘기하고 뭐 방금 말씀하신 1억 무이자 대출 할 때 와 하잖아요. 이런 것들을 해야 되는 거예요. 그러니까 돈을 더 쓰는 것이 중요한 게 아니라 이건 다른 회사에서 있잖아 라는 것은 사실은 구직자들 입장에서는 이거 동등한 건데라고 하기 때문에 뭔가 마케팅 포인트가 될 만한 것들을 잘 찾아서 하시는 게 훨씬 더 중요하지 않을까라는 팁을 드리고 싶습니다.
네. Due to time limit, I'm gonna take just one last question. Let's see. Many Korean CEOs and companies don't buy the concept that happiness leads to success, happiness leads to performance. So the question is how to persuade them. Maybe you guys have a thought?
I can be very quick on this one. If they're still not bought in by the idea that employee well-being matters just for its own sake, for philosophical reasons, then send them the video of this conference. And have them listen to these two insightful and visionary CEOs about investing in well-being and how good it's been done in practice through them and their companies. But then also show them I think the best scientific material worldwide by Sonia and colleagues and me and my team that shows black on white the investment case, the business case for why investing in employee well-being returns almost immediately in terms of productivity gains, and in the long run also for firm performance. So please, please, please share this material as widely as you possibly can to try and convince the skeptics that are still out there.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. Yes, show them the data. It's not fake news. This is, trust the data, trust the science.
Yeah, trust the science.
네.
Uh,
저는 더 적극적인 방법을,
Yeah.
행동주의적인 방법으로 그 회사를 나오세요.
quit
그러면은
the company.
경영자들이 바로 알 거예요.
맞아요.
예.
맞아요. 저도 사실 같은 답을 준비하고 있었는데 just leave the company. 두 가지로 의미가 있는데, 하나는 그 회사는 어차피 잘 안 될 거다. 그리고 두 번째는 그게 사실은 경영진의 서포터 없이는 웰빙은 만들 수 없습니다. 그렇기 때문에 경영진을 설득해야 되는 상황이라면 안 설득해도 되는 여기를 오셔도 되고, 네.
Okay, time is up. Thank you all for coming to this wonderful conference, and I really appreciate our speakers, panels for sharing their thoughts, wisdoms, and experiences. Look at the size of the audience; it's overwhelming. I mean, Korea is obviously suffering from a severe imbalance of life and work. At the same time, we want happiness. This is just the beginning. I'm hoping that Korea, the Korean society is becoming better and happier society. Thank you. Thank you all.